that we have people who are on the front lines who are doing great, great work and transforming the lives of young men, and in doing so, helping to transform their families and our communities. So this is the work in which we are very, very committed to. And so without further ado, I'm thrilled for you to meet the leaders of our schools. These are not simply the principals of each one of the individual Eagle Academies, but they are some of the most dedicated people I have ever met. I'm in awe really of the work and the work ethic that they bring each and every day to do what I think is the most challenging work in the country. And that is to engage in a process of educating Black and brown boys. That work is a work that a lot of people shy away from. And so when you start talking about heroes on the front line, these are heroes in my mind and in the minds of so many others. And so I want to begin by welcoming each one of them. And first up, we just want to just introduce them and say hello, is the principal of the Eagle Academy in Staten Island, Mr. Jermaine Cameron. Jermaine, good evening.
Hello, everyone. It's good to be here. Good night, Mr. Banks. Good night, my fellow brother and sister principals. It's good to be here, and I'm looking forward to this conversation.
Great. Thank you, Jermaine. And you said our sister. That's right. Yep. And so there's the one rose and there's better thorns. And so we want to welcome our sister Lakia Washington from the Eagle Academy of Harlem.
Good evening, Eagle principals, family. It's good to be here. I'm excited.
All right, great. Thank you, Lakia. And all the way from the Bronx, the principal, Eagle Bronx, Mr. Hector Velazquez. Hector?
Good evening, Mr. Bank. Good evening, brothers and sisters. Good evening, family members, and Bronx strong. Bronx strong.
That's right, BX. We're gonna shift over to Brooklyn. You know, my good friend, the borough president of Brooklyn said that there are two kinds of people, the people who live in Brooklyn and the people who wish that they lived in Brooklyn. And so we want to welcome and introduce, he was on with us on our first session from Ocean Hill, Brownsville, Principal Rashad Meade. Rashad, good evening.
Good evening, everyone.
All right, thank
See
you.
you guys.
All right. And all the way out from Newark, New Jersey, on the other side of the water, but our brother indeed, please join us in welcoming brother Principal Semone Morant.
Good evening, all from the Jersey side.
That's it. Good evening. And last but certainly not least, our brother from Eagle Queens, Southeast Queens. He's doing his thing out there. Longtime Eagle man, Principal Cedric Hall. Good evening, Cedric.
Good evening, Mr. Banks. Thank you for having me here with my colleagues. Good evening, colleagues. Pleasure to be here and share the platform. Good evening, Eagle community and everyone that's watching this evening.
That's right. That's right. Well, welcome. Listen, let's get right to it, right? The mayor had a press conference today along with the chancellor, where he essentially gave some information around the grading policy for schools, how they expect to kind of finish up this year, remote learning, the distribution of laptops for the continuation of the remote learning. That's going to have its ups and downs, as I'm sure that you all have seen. But I actually wanted to shift a little bit into what's going to happen as we go into the summer and next year. This COVID-19 has presented a major challenge, and smart people right now are figuring out what's the next step. How are we going to transition our young people and our teachers back as we go into the next school year? And so I really want you to, this is not something I'm posing to any one person. I'd like for this to kind of be a bit more of a group discussion. Thoughts, ideas, innovation. What are you thinking about? What are the conversations that you've been having with your folks in your school as we start to prepare for next year? Under the assumption that we're not going back to school for the rest of this year, probably not going to be in school for the summer. What is next year going to look like? What do you envision? What have you been having conversations about? Don't you all start talking at once. Don't make me have to call on somebody.
I mean, I know in Queens, any of the breaking news regarding the return to school and what that looked like wasn't new. I think most of us knew to be simultaneously planning in 2 academic years at the same time. So planning as if we were returning back to April 20th, planning as if we were not. planning as if there were summer sessions and planning as if there were not, planning as if we didn't return back to buildings and transition back to normalcy of operations until September, and possibly beyond. Just kind of re-looking at the trends of the country, and kind of feeling a lot of the energy and the movement of both Cuomo and the dynamics with our mayor here. We had been planning simultaneously for almost every possible scenario. So a lot of it is not going to be contributions of origin in this conversation, but really just kind of a review of what the team I know in Queens has been doing for at least about a month and a half at this point to try to ease the transition and reduce any margin of error and what we already know is going to be a complex and probably rippled start to a school year.
And for any of the other principals, like what does that look like? What does a plan A look like? What does a plan B look like? What have you been thinking about? Jermaine, you want to jump?
Oh, absolutely. So for us in Staten Island, it's really taken into consideration just where we are currently. I know that we alluded to the fact that we now have a new grading policy. But I think being an Eagle school places us in a unique predicament, right? So thinking about the 6 through 12 time span and how it is that we are preparing to support our young men in September. Notwithstanding, we know that we'll have some loss of instructional time, loss of learning time, if you will, and there will be a great need to play catch up. So we start to think about what does programming will look like for our young men in September, right? Thinking about those first 2 months of the school year, right? And planning both vertically and horizontally as it relates to ensuring that our curricular resources are such that will support our young men for the time lost as they would have gained in the regular school year. But certainly thinking about ideas around looping, ideas around programming, ideas around just preparing for what the young men will need so that they can remain successful in the sequential courses that should come.
So Jermaine, so tell me, so I'm a parent, 6th or 7th grader. I'm not necessarily familiar with all the educational jargon of looping and whatnot, right? So what does that mean? What might happen? What's my son's experience potentially going to look like when he comes back, maybe for his 2nd year, he's a 7th grader. He walks back in day 1. They're saying we got to still practice social distancing. What does that look like in your school?
So I'll start with the 6th grade students, the 6th grade scholars coming in, right? So we've started thinking about the conversations that potentially our 6th grade educators will be having with our feeder elementary schools, right? Mm-hmm. And really getting a sense of where they left off, right? So we know that will be a big reach, but nonetheless, it's a conversation worthwhile having, right? Looking from the instructional forefront at standards that were covered and standards that were not covered, because we know once we get back to the building, it won't be business as usual, but there are certain accountability measures that our schools will be facing, right? So certainly taking into consideration all that was missed and making the preparations necessary to compact curriculum and instruction so that the young men can move forward. Mm-hmm. I'll even give an example for the 8th grade. So today we had a conversation around whether or not our 8th grade scholars who were in our accelerated classes, what their experiences will be like in our 9th grade, right? And ensuring that we're programming teachers accordingly so that they're picking up, if you will, and tying up all the loose ends for the scholars. So for the parent, we want to ensure that we are taking into consideration what each and every scholar needs most and almost giving a prescribed plan for each child that enters our building.
Mm-hmm. Principal Washington, what are your thoughts? What have you been talking to your Harlem community about?
So I think to piggyback off of what Principal Cameron was saying, obviously we are going to be looking at instruction heavily, but also how do we continue this professional learning for teachers around technology? I think this has illuminated the use of a different platform to access different leverage points for the variety of students that we meet the needs of in our schools. So I think thinking about strategically, how do you continue the work that's happening remotely and building that technology gap for our teachers as well as our students to be able to meet those needs. But I think more importantly also for Eagle, we pride ourselves on connections and relationships. We're also thinking about the incoming 6th and 9th grade students who we usually do a summer bridge with. What does that look like in order to wrap arms around this new community and family. So really beginning to think about what the outreach looks like. How do we leverage our students to reach out to incoming students and families to already build and welcome them into this new equal community and family? So there's the tone and culture parts of thinking about how we continue to do the work that is equal and to do that remotely with social distancing, but also thinking about how we prepare our educators to be able to meet the needs of the various students and the learning gaps that we know this virus has already presented to our children.
Sure. Principal Velazquez, thoughts? What are you guys thinking about? What are you guys talking about on your team?
Echoing everything that my colleagues are saying, I think first and foremost, human connection is incredibly important. I think there is some level of isolation right now that we are all going through, having to experience staying home. Some of our most of our seniors, obviously, are potentially not going to be celebrated the way that they should be celebrated. So just thinking about some of the events that need to happen potentially in the summer and maybe even in the fall for our seniors who potentially are looking to graduate, but also with our 8th graders. I heard Principal Cameron say, we're a 6 through 12 model. So when we're thinking about our 8th graders, they're stepping up. And they deserve a level of celebration as well. It's important for us to continue thinking about human connection, but also with instruction, just thinking about how you're building capacity with teacher teams. At this point right now, I think there's a lot of opportunity for us. We have grade teams that are reaching out to various students and family members.
When you say grade teams?
Grade teams, correct, right.
What does that mean? Just so the audience is clear.
Right. So, for example, each grade has a group of educators and support staff members that essentially reach out to each young man within that grade, just to ensure that we are providing them with a level of support that they may need, given that they may not have technology or they may have some technology issues, just to check in with them, just in case they need to build some level of routine. Our boys come from a lot of structure. So this remote learning presents sometimes obstacles around ensuring that there is that level of structure and accountability. And so each grade team is responsible for providing outreach to the young men and the families to ensure that we are tracking their progress.
And that's going on. That's going on right now.
Correct. We also have our department chairs as well that are engaged in a level of inquiry, thinking about remote learning and how that applies to our virtual classrooms. Each educator has built in a Google Classroom. We are also very big on rituals and traditions. So we have classrooms for our house models, where the young men can check in daily to ensure that we're not just focusing on instruction, but also thinking about their social and emotional states.
Sure.
So our departments are right now working on thinking about what learning looks like remotely. We identified various different gaps of learning before remote learning. We anticipate that those gaps are going to exist when we do return. So now we're thinking about focusing on ensuring that we assess every young man when we do come back, and thinking about individual plans to support them. So for example, writing is an area of struggle for some of our young men. So what is writing going to look like remotely? How do we ensure that it's happening, that we're giving actionable feedback in Google Classrooms, and that when we do return, we can get back to thinking about how human connection plays a role in all of this.
Sure. Principal Morant, you're on the other side of the water. You got the only school of its kind out there, right? I mean, these guys on the New York side kind of have their own connection here, all serving under the same system. But you're on the Jersey side, so that presents its own unique sets of challenges, right? What have you and your team been thinking about as you start to think about the long-term preparation for returning?
Yeah, I think that, well, first, it's just, given the current circumstance, the unfortunate piece, we were able to find some positives from it, so we really learned that we were really good with technology in terms of setting up a virtual platform and just really understanding that, this might continue into September. So thinking about the things that we did well and how we can strengthen our practices just in case when we return that, we might have to continue to operate virtually from a remote learning space. So I think that the conversations that we really been having is, if we do have to continue remote learning, or if we do get in the building space where it's somewhat of a blended platform of using remote learning and, actual instruction in the classroom, we can sustain that while simultaneously growing teachers to be more tech savvy, like Lakia said. The other piece in terms of the human connections, I heard Hector, really point out of how do we do that better? Eagle is full of rituals and routines that are very important to the boys. So we've been thinking about how do we do this better in terms of our town halls, our convocations, our house meetings, all of those different things. So we've been having those conversations. How do we strengthen those practices? And how do we really stay connected with students? Because a lot of times, with the remote learning platform, you hear from kids one week and then you don't hear from them. So just thinking about ways that we can stay connected with them and support them in the best way.
I appreciate that, and we're glad to see your little one joining us as well.
You see him peeking around the corner, right?
Right. But look here, is that your son or your daughter?
No, that's my son.
Of course.
Of course, yes.
That's what the boys are going to do. He told us upstairs, and he said, I need to check out and see what's going on, right? So Principal Meade, you're the longest tenured Eagle principal. You've been doing this work longer than anybody. The chancellor's office is still trying to figure this stuff out, right? I mean, it's very fluid right now. They don't have all the answers. They turn to you, Principal Meade, and they say, what say you? We're trying to come up with some answers. We're trying to come up with some innovative ways to bring out all of our students back into all of our schools across New York City. What are some of the kinds of ideas that you would share with them?
I think, the irony in this situation is that, our parents are more involved and more informed than they've ever been. So when our young men are engaged in remote learning, a lot of times they're in their rooms or at the dinner table right there with their parents. And their parents are being introduced to, teachers sometimes for the first time in that context, and they can kind of follow up in ways that they never could before, particularly on a classroom, everyday kind of level. So I think, there's a lot of energy and momentum, after a pretty rough start for all of us around just how active our parents are. So we had a parent meeting, a virtual parent meeting, our second of the year just yesterday. And we kind of framed, some of the work that we have to do. We have to make up a lot of ground. It's going to be a lot of pressure on, us as school leaders and on our educators as well. But there's a parent population and there's a power in our parents that we need to really activate and keep going, right?
What do you mean by that?
So our kids adapted very fast. A lot of times the adjustment, in terms of remote learning, were on the adults, on us as school leaders, on educators and parents as well. So once we kind of got over that learning curve, we don't want our parents and our families to believe, all right, once school is back in session, I can take a step back and give my child over to the school again. Right. And then do my parent teacher check-ins or, check in every once in a while. No, we still need you over your child's shoulder, once September starts, now more than ever. So I think finding a way to continue to keep our parents as informed, as involved and right over their child's shoulder like they are now, we can't lose that momentum, because if we activate that population to really close that gap that we know is going to exist, I think that's where the work is. And, some of the work that we're doing right now is around literacy. Our young men, particularly young men of color, they come into us, 2, maybe 3 years behind in reading. I think sometimes when you start talking about geometry and physics and earth science, you kind of lose parents. But when you start talking about reading and reading with your child and reading growth and reading improvement, I think that's something that, our parents can, can use to remain involved and keep their child accountable, but also it's an activity that they can engage in with their child. I think finding ways that, we can still, keep that closeness and access that our parents have now into the summer and into September will create all new kinds of schools for us and create new norms.
Yep. Principal Hall, so when they say to you that we're coming back, we're starting in September, but it will not be a regular opening, we have to practice, this safe distancing in our school. How does that look for you? How do you, it's an oxymoron, right? Safe distancing in schools and kids. What might that look like for you?
So the challenge, I think, for us, first of all, we're schools of all boys. So social distancing by nature is asking them to do opposite what everything in their body is saying to do. So that by itself is something that you have to recognize. And I think it speaks to understanding the very unique and privileged population that we serve of boys. We can focus on what it is we know about the habits of young men. And we know that that's going to be a thing, right? Literally, I can talk to a young man about something, whether it be a slip up in language or anything of that nature. Literally, I'll turn around and turn back. They've done it again and didn't even process and realize that they did it again, right? So if I stay 6 feet away, they're like, no problem, Principal Hall. I'll turn around and they're going to high five and dap their guy up and not even think about it. So we have to essentially norm what that looks like. I spoke to staff today in a programming meeting, and I said, we have to talk about the trajectory of instruction. We have to talk about what it looks like to readapt educators who have had to pivot and turn a switch of their normal pedagogy in the classroom and their practices over to virtual. But we're going to have to start like in some basics, right? We're going to have to re-norm some things with some of the guys. As Principal Cameron spoke about earlier, we're really about structures and systems and being tight for the young men. But by the time they get back, and this applies to their academic slippage, this applies to all their habits, they wouldn't have been in the system of Eagle for up to almost half a year by the time we come back, right? So that's an extended amount of time. So before we just come in with the hammer of, we've got a year and a half worth of progress to do with you. Day one, let's slam them, right? Assessments and all this. We got to take a step back and think about the psyche and the mental health of these young men and reacclimating them back into the buildings. So for us, that looks like, being cognizant about what class sizes look like, really leveraging a lot of the support staff to figure out if it's not directly instructional, how can we utilize some of the bodies in the building to do a lot of the social emotional work, whether it be restorative justice pieces, the house piece, and a lot of those Eagle rituals, and really figuring out where everybody's best fit is, because we're going to have to maximize everybody in the building, literally everybody in the building. Special focus on our middle school guys, because they're the ones that are the most inept to just kind of being and congregating and being social in the way that they are. A lot of them, the school building is where they get to fulfill a lot of their socialization, because at home they're either still young or there's still restrictions on their ability to be out and things of that nature. So we just have to create that space. Operationally, is something that we have to do. I've sat down with our custodial engineer as well to talk about space management and planning and operations in our building, as it's going to look very, very different. In Queens, it's already a very small and tight building as it is.
Give me one thing that would look different. What's one thing that when you're thinking would look different?
Probably leveraging out some spaces and something as simple as our cafeteria, right? Like, I think we think like, the instruction and the academics is core and at the top, but we're talking about health at this point as well. So even the spacing of food services, gym, what does gym look like? Tell 500 young men, specifically young men of color, that they can't play basketball in the gym in the way that they once played basketball in the gym, right? We're strict on lines and things of that nature, but if your hallway is only but so long and you're trying to transition 7 sections of middle schoolers, right? Social distancing is going to be a challenge. So timing out our academic periods and really looking at what our bell schedule looks like to really accommodate extended transition. To make sure that the young men aren't feeling rushed in haste into their instruction and their do nows and the components. Operationally is where that's going to really be key. and figuring that piece out, leveraging different parts of the building for instructional classrooms, as long as it meets the criteria for the Department of Education and the academic policy, leveraging parts of the building that we may not have before, just to reduce class sizes, to be able to practice that social distancing. So operations is kind of where that's going to really happen, and really making sure we're supporting teachers in that as well. Because just intimacy and touch and the way that the boutique model of an Eagle school, we want to maintain that. We're not 3,000 scholar school buildings like a lot of other high schools. And it's going to be a challenge, but it's going to live in the bulk and the core of the operations.
That's right. That's right. There's so much for us to continue to learn and share with each other. There's so much for the system to learn. A lot of people are going to see this conversation today, including folk at DOE. And so I'm certainly hopeful that they're going to take some of these nuggets and these gems that are being shared by all of you today. Principal Cameron out in Staten Island, I remember reaching out to you, and you were out delivering in the midst of this pandemic, personally, delivering laptops and whatnot to students and schoolwork. Tell me about that, and what are some of the key learnings that have emerged for you from being engaged in this overall crisis?
So certainly, when school closed back in March, as a team, we started thinking about, even before the Department of Education started making devices available to students, we wanted to ensure that all of our young men had a device with which to work, right? And so we leveraged all of what we had in both our buildings to families, for those whom we were unable to make contacts with. I personally delivered, along with some of my support staff at the school, just to ensure that we are supporting our young men, to ensure that they are making the instructional moves necessary. But one of the things that I've noticed for us on Staten Island, it was a relatively smooth transition to online learning. In our 8th through 11th grade, we were already on Google Classroom for the most part, but it took some time for our 6th and 7th grade scholars and their families to get acclimated. But nonetheless, we were able to do it simply overnight. But one of the things that we've discovered was the way in which some of our scholars, some of our young men who were largely disengaged in the physical building, we've discovered that they are the most engaged during this time period, right? And so it's now forcing us to think collectively as to what our programmatic schedules should look like in the fall, right? So we need to start thinking about the psychological makeup of such a learner, right? So that it's not necessarily just being in the physical classroom, but ensuring that he is still having some of those experiences in the remote space, in the actual building. One of the other things that greatly emerged, I think, no offense to the other principals, but I think I have the best parent body on planet Earth.
Don't start no stuff up here now.
I'm going to start it, right? I'm going to start it, but I'm telling you the nature of the way in which my parents have rallied around, right? And so we've always been successful in getting a solid number of parents at our PTA meeting. I think even we're probably one of the only schools who hold a traditional PTA meeting during the week as opposed to the weekends. But even with that model, we have seen just a great number of parental engagement throughout the day, even after hours, if you will. And so what we're also thinking about is how to ensure that we're maintaining that momentum. So one of the things we started doing just before closure was actually live streaming some of our PTA meetings to ensure that we are reaching those parents who normally would not necessarily come to the physical building, right? So those are the two things that we're thinking about capitalizing upon a little bit more, how to ensure that those young men were normally not reached during the school day and are now being reached at home, how we ensure that's continued, and how we ensure that we're continuing this process of engagement with all of our families.
I love that. And I think that several of you, I've seen Cedric Hall, Principal Hall out in Queens on a weekly basis, going live, talking to his entire school community. I think that is so important. It's an opportunity to kind of redefine what it means to engage our parents and our families. So it's not simply how many people showed up at that parent meeting. Now, we've been forced into this space, but now our parents, our educators, our administrators are all so much more familiar with the technology now that I think the possibilities really are endless. Principal Washington in Harlem, you've been a longtime teacher and assistant principal, but you recently transitioned to being the principal at Eagle Harlem.
Yes.
Right? What has been kind of most rewarding, surprising about stepping into this new role as a principal and doing it during this time, essentially, of a crisis that has hit?
Trial by fire. I'm grateful to have had the Eagle family community Meade for how long? 13 years almost. I've done a number of professional developments around boys as relational learners and the importance of connection. That has been the most important part of me transitioning mid-year, to see those young men really carry and lift me. I didn't know what to expect day one when I walked in the building. I didn't know if it was going to be anarchy or what, but every classroom that I walked into, those young men applauded me. They said how proud of me they were. That's usually us telling them how proud we are of them. I had young men telling me they were so proud to watch my transition and growth, and what it meant for them to see me aspire to do things and to move up in the time that I had. So the relationships that have been built over the years is what has carried me. It's the reason why I'm not crawling to the finish line right now in the corner crying somewhere, because it's been heavy. I applaud you all for what you do. Even as an assistant principal, it is nothing compared to what the school building leader as a principal has to do. And my hats go off to all of you who've been doing it for a number of years. But I have to say that my school community, the students, the parents, the teachers, my relationships with members in the district or Manhattan Borough office, they have really helped and supported me through this. And so I don't know, many of you know, we had a loss of a student right before the virus hit. And so our community didn't even have time to come together to grieve. But I'm so grateful for family. And it's not just a school, this is a family. And the parent meetings have carried me. The other day, I had a really rough moment emotionally, and I had a 6 o'clock parent meeting. I started to do the weekly updates, not the live, because I like to see the faces. So I do the Zoom because I need to see the people and the students pop in. And the parents in the chat just saying, thank you. You all are doing a great job. I appreciate you. The text messages, I cannot tell you how much that carried me to the next day. Like, it really fed my spirit. And I know parents don't get to hear that, but thank you so much. Because as caregivers, we are charged with taking care of everyone. We're like the Moses is leading everyone to the promised land, but we don't seem to make it in. And we often don't have a space and a place to rest. And so I'm grateful for those who allow us to kind of let our shoulders down for a minute, be vulnerable, be human, and to give ourselves permission to sit in it and say, that's okay, and be ready to go, right? So I have my moment and I'm ready to go live and in front of the school community. So I'm grateful for connection. I'm grateful for relationships.
Wow.
At this moment.
That's wonderful. That's wonderful. And welcome to the ranks of leadership. It is not easy, and we are thrilled with your leadership and continued appreciation to you. And thank you so much. And talking again about community and connection, Principal Morant, Eagle culture is a hallmark of what we do. And you've heard some of the things you said all across the board this evening, right? What unique community building things have you been engaged with and doing? Eagle Newark has had a whole host of partnerships in the community. What are some ways in which you've been able to continue to maintain, beyond the parents, just some of our community partners, during this time?
Yeah, I just really want to first start off by just really thanking my staff. I think that, we had to make this shift so quickly. It was almost like overnight where we were told that, we had to prepare. So, really my staff responded, swiftly. Shout out to my VP who really took charge of everything, a lot of things, and really guided us to a space where virtual and remote learning, it just happened seamlessly. And to Jermaine's point, our grades 9 through 12, they made the shift really quickly because we had already been operating in that space. And our middle school struggled a little bit, but we got them on board. But to answer your question, we've really been staying in touch with GroupMe. We had some community builders where we did push-up challenges with staff and students. Staff has been posting, videos and things, and, just keeping the culture and everybody's spirits up, because so many people are losing family members. We're just trying to really, lift everybody's spirits, let all the boys know that we still here for them. We're still here to support them. And then the whole remote learning piece is really stressful, not only for students, but for staff, every day logging on and really having conversations with keeping the boys in routines, because routines seem to be the big thing. Guys was waking up at 11, 12 o'clock, and that's not what they're used to at Eagle North. They're really used to having to be there in the morning time, be prepared for that town hall led by myself, Mr. Abdullah, and the other deans, and people are out of sync. So we've really been trying to have those community builders with our staff and our students, and keeping everybody's energy in a good space. And to that mental health piece, it's critical. I heard Cedric talk about it. People are in bad spaces now, and I think that they're looking to Eagle for that guidance, for that support, for that leverage to feel good. And I just think, we're doing a good job at doing that. Of course, we always strive to be better, but, my parents and my community have responded well, and we're just going to continue to charge, continue to focus, continue the mission, and be everything that we can be for our young men.
Appreciate you, man. Appreciate that, and keep that work going. Principal Hall, right? I know the Southeast Queens community was hit particularly hard by this virus. I grew up in that community, and so I've heard on a lot of what has happened. I know you've been dealing with a lot of grief. Talk to us a little bit about your leadership and how you've been able to kind of help bring your students, your teachers, your parents, your families, the community together in the Eagle community to deal with this level of grief in the community.
Yeah, as many know, because it was national news actually at one point, actually the Southeast Queens community was one of the roughest, and at one point the roughest hit in New York City. And our school took a hit. We lost staff, parents of scholars, our own staff battling and kind of going back and forth with it, and still trying to maintain and do the work. So what I've always been about from day one is understanding that the vessel of an individual is the primary objective, because without a strong vessel, whatever you pour content-wise into the vessel, if there's cracks, if there's holes, if it's unstable, then all the content spill right on out to the floor. So you have to take care of the vessel of an individual, the human. So operating with heart has been my message from day one, leading and operating with heart. It got a little heavy for me, actually. I will share with, and with my colleague, Principal Washington, that as a school building leader, there have been many emotional moments throughout this. And as school building leaders, we service not just one building or one entity, we service every stakeholder in human existence you can think of: politicians, small business owners, scholars, and parents, and staff, and everybody you can think about, other city agencies and everything going on. And everyone is looking at you to lead, which then in turn means everyone needs to either express themselves and how they're coming through in this time, and or make you aware of what's going on. And I don't know about my colleagues, but I can say that I, at one point, was literally the conduit for all information, all tragedy, all everything. And personally, that's heavy. As you're maintaining your own sanity and health, and you're trying to do the things. And I've got a 1.5-year-old and a 3-year-old at home. And, I'm like a lot of my teachers now, trying to work full time, and what has doubled in capacity of work while managing them. But I'm also getting, we're on every platform. We want to reach everybody digitally, which means that there is increased opportunity for all of that news to come in. So what we did was we created a wellness committee. And the wellness committee is made up of a number of our non-instructional pedagogues that had some flexibility in their workday to be able to field this. We created email address of wellness@eaglequeens.org where everybody can just send it in. We then created a spreadsheet and we have weekly meetings where the contact is made. We save the contact information of the individual and what the response was. If it's a card, if it's a home visit, some of them depending on, you know, the gravity of it, particularly if it's scholars, I'm getting on video and I'm talking with them in every type of way. Some of our young men, especially the seniors, we're hit pretty hard, right? With their own grief and wanting to check out. So, you know, braving the elements of a supermarket, you know, I've stepped out in the parking lot and I'm like giving them that eagle speech of this ain't the time, brother. I get it. I feel it all. I understand it. This virus is the greatest equalizer we could have possibly ever thought about, right? We're all at a level. Celebrities are roughing it with the grooming, just like us regular folks, right? You know, people are experiencing tragedy. And Michael Che does a whole monologue about losing his grandmother while still having to go to work and do SNL. All of these things are heavy, and we have to operate with heart at all times. What we knew before in terms of structures and systems and the aggressiveness of it, that's got to be shelved for a second. Still be rational, still form accountability. But if we don't move in spirit and heart and love at this point, we are going to have a drastic reduction of scholars and people to come back to in September, because your will and your mind and your mental health is actually your greatest survival tool out of everything in this. And we have to continue to fuel that and support all of our families. And I praise everyone I can. And please make sure that we give recognition to all the stakeholders, down to those custodians who are cleaning that building every single day, shouting them out on the live. They've been there from day one, and they're in there every, like 6 days a week till 5 o'clock after being in there from 7 to 5, scrubbing the walls, you know, doing everything. So we got to remember everybody, forget no one, and just be the work.
That's right. That's right. Thank you. Thank you for your leadership, brother. Principal Velazquez, how has your school community come together in a way that may have surprised you or made you proud?
Yeah, so that week of the 16th of March, when we were told that students were to remain home and that we were going to practice social distancing and create a plan for our young men, that was a very difficult and challenging week. It weighed heavy on me as a leader in the school community, just thinking about uncharted waters and what that meant. I immediately thought about our seniors. I thought about our parents. I thought about our educators. I worried about our educators potentially calling out because of the fear of the unknown, of not knowing, potentially putting themselves at risk, putting their families at risk. But I got to tell you that in our school community, every educator came to the building for all 3 days. We managed to create a system for distributing technology, most of the technology that we had. Our boys were incredibly amazing as they came back to the building to pick up the technology. I think that also made many of us emotional, just because when you see a young man, we're used to greeting them in the morning, putting a hand on his shoulder, checking in with them, and now having to practice this level of social distancing was definitely difficult and took a toll on us. But we hit the ground running. By that Friday, we had Google Classrooms up and running. We created an email address that goes out to the entire administrative team. I have quite a number of amazing teacher leaders in the school community that often meet weekly, balancing a 2-year-old or 3-year-old hanging over their shoulders, having to check in with the young men online. But it's done consistently. They do not check out. None of our staff members check out at all. In fact, they correspond with the young men on a consistent basis. Assignments are given. They've opened up their classrooms for feedback, which I think could potentially cause a level of anxiety, just because this remote learning thing is new for everyone. But I think the educators, the administrators, we have another teacher lead in the school who's pretty amazing, who has worked to support our technology platform at the school. Mr. Bissonette has done a great job with just responding to parents, helping out with the distribution of iPads. Just an incredible amount of people that we've dealt with. We've dealt with a lot of loss as well. We have educators that have lost family members that have not taken off. We have an educator, Ms. Ortiz, who lost an uncle, had an option to take, bereavement, and said, my connection to the young men will keep me going through this.
Wow.
So I think just the daily connection to the community from the educators have made me incredibly proud. And I also got to say the resilience of the young men. At this point, right now, in week 6, we've made contact with every young man in our Google Classrooms, with the exception of 9. I think that's an amazing accomplishment. And thinking about how we're tracking meaningful engagement in the classroom. So the young men are incredible. As soon as we began our Google Classrooms, they started, chatting on the streams and saying hello. We all got emotional and just looking at the young men on the streams. I also would like to give a big shout out also to the safety agents who are coming to the buildings as well, in addition to the custodians, and are doing a wonderful job. But in just thinking about our parents as well, we had our first parent meeting last week, and to Principal Washington's point, the amount of love that was typed in the chat for the educators was amazing. Just the patience of the parents, the understanding of this whole new way of learning, putting their trust in us, having their faith in us, and knowing that we are going to do what's right for our sons, for our children. I think overall, Eagle Bronx has the best parents. That's my opinion. I think it's amazing, and I'm looking forward to just engaging, our school leadership team on thinking about, it's a great mix of parents and educators and students to get feedback around potentially what next year could look like for us. So I'm just incredibly proud of my school community in thinking about the R and clear around resilience. So,
absolutely.
Big shout out to Eagle Bronx. I mean, they're amazing.
Wow, that's great. That's great. And I appreciate that. And Principal Meade, I know you've been doing a lot of work with your parents as well, as you mentioned a little bit earlier, and getting them involved virtually in a way with numbers that we've not seen before, right? And so people are really connected. I don't know, one of the themes that has emerged is this notion of adaptability, innovation, and independence. It's just something that you've created. Tell me a little bit about that, and even for your other colleagues, what is that, and what does that represent?
We're looking at this as an opportunity to almost reset our community, and we have a pre-COVID way of thinking, which quite honestly hasn't resulted in our community doing as well as it can. We have the present moment, and then we have a post-COVID world, which our young men are going to be entering. And in order for our young men, in our opinion, to really navigate that space, they're going to have to adapt. And they have done that. So, kids adapt very quickly. But we don't want our young men to think that they're adapting just for this moment. We want them to, understand that you're going to have this level of flexibility and ability to adapt, for the rest of your life, because we never know what challenges are around the corner. But also, we have to have our young men be at the forefront of innovation. How can we look at, the situations in a crisis like this and come up with new answers? Our young men and our scholars and our educators and parents, we're very, very creative people. And this is a crisis that we're facing right now. And it's going to require a completely new way to approach some of our, older problems. And then also, how do we develop a sense of independence? And I think the remote learning space has created an opportunity for our kids to really develop a level of independence and accountability that, prior to, this current situation, the current crisis, they may not have had the complete opportunity to do that. So requiring our young men to reach out to an educator for, support, but if you're not getting a response that is an immediate response like you would in a classroom, can you go out and find that information on your own? can you be a self-starter? And we've been kind of thrust into this position, but I think it also provides an opportunity to continue to cultivate that. So just looking at, those three things, how do we, adapt? How do we innovate and develop long-term independence? And that's not just for our scholars, that's for our parents as well. You have to think differently post-COVID than we did pre-COVID.
I saw a flyer that you put out, which talked about pre-COVID, current time, and post-COVID as relates to the parent relationship with this child and the school. Tell us that very quickly.
So I think pre-COVID, the thinking was, I'm going to check in around parent-teacher conferences. I better not hear nothing crazy. Don't make me come up to that school. Right? Like that was the understanding. If you check those boxes as a kid, you were good to go. Right? Like that's the checklist our boys do right before parent-teacher conferences.
Christmas is safe.
Right. Christmas is safe. So our young men, they understand that. So sometimes, they may not have gone as hard as they needed to go in the beginning because they were just trying to catch up for that moment.
Exactly.
Present COVID, that moment is every day. So before a kid even puts on socks and a shirt sometimes, like my son, right? Before he puts on a shirt and socks, he logs on to his Google Classroom to check in with his class, right? And I'm right there for that. So in that present moment, you develop, my child is in 4th grade and I have a daughter in the 2nd grade, they're developing a sense of independence that I didn't even know they had, to be able to troubleshoot for each other, and to support each other, with projects and to critique me, right? So I do a number of town halls every day. I hear from my daughter in particular, Daddy, you're talking too loud. You look angry and you sound angry. Be nice.
Nice.
Right. So that's present COVID for me. My children are seeing firsthand what I do every day and are giving me feedback. And I'm seeing them firsthand every day in ways I've never was able to see them before. And I'm able to provide them feedback too. So that's the present moment. But, the challenge for us is, post-COVID, how do we continue that? How does, my job not be so much of a mystery to my children? And how can I ensure that what they do on a daily basis, even as an educator, is not so much of a mystery to me? Right. And I think if we all take that, mentality going forward, we can develop a different level of accountability, but more so support, which I think is going to be everything, once we, return to a school building, because we're all going through this. Right. Some form of fashion, we're all going through this, and it's going to leave a mark. But that mark, will fade a little quicker, if we kind of have that mentality of, this collective that's been developed while we're in this present crisis is going to have to continue to be of support, when we can move around outside and go to the supermarket and not just see, empty shelves and, cans of soup that nobody wants to eat, right? Like once those days are over, we still want to have that certain sense of community that allowed us to get through this current moment.
That's right. That's right. Thank you, Rashad. Listen, we're going to do a quick round robin, everybody. Your own level of self-care, which is what we have been sharing with parents and community to get them through this. You've got to take care of yourself first. And so just curious to know, what are some of the things that you're doing? Cedric, I heard you talk before about the Peloton and how amazing that's been. Tell us about it. We're going to do a 30-second round robin, everybody. Get ready. Just tell us what's your routine. What are you doing to keep things up for yourself? Cedric.
So first of all, I had to begin a routine because it was trash for a while and it had me all the way off, right? Getting up, and just jumping around, but that simple things like, wait a minute, did I shower yet? Nah, and it's 9 p.m., right? Like getting a routine. But working out has been the best. Even before this, I had to go and take a run. You got to get out, you got to clear your head. Your body is the most important thing right now. And it will either deceive you or it will help you in this time. So anything you can do in terms of diet, recipes, working out, do it. It's important. And it's extremely important in the event that you do contract the virus. That is your greatest weapon of fighting it, is physical health and being as prepared as possible.
Very good. Well, we appreciate you taking that shower before 9 o'clock. Eagle
Had
principals,
you said that.
Eagle principals, we got a reputation to maintain. So appreciate that. Jermaine Cameron, what are you doing? What's your routine, man? What are you doing to keep yourself strong?
Listen, besides showering at 7 a.m. No, for me, on a personal level, faith plays an important role in my life. And I think just ensuring that I'm centering myself first and being able to ensure, I think it was Hall who said the vessel has to be secured, ensuring that I'm at a place of balance to ensure that I can deposit in the lives of my educators. So I think just momentarily pausing and just really connecting myself with God, connecting myself deeper with my faith has kept me going through these difficult times.
Great, great. Appreciate that. Principal Morant, what's your routine, man? What are you doing?
You know, just literally hanging with family. You know, you put so many hours in the day at the job, you know, you don't give a lot of time to the family. So, you know, I have a young son. My son is 6, my daughter's 10. And, you know, just being with them and my wife, you know, giving the time back that, because we put in so many hours, you know, so just literally being with them, that's great mental health for me.
Great. Principal Velazquez.
Making sure that I have a routine, got a balanced work and life, currently on a keto diet. Big shout out to the matriarch of my family, my mother, who allowed me to build a fitness center in a basement. So I'm actually training down there with my brother-in-law.
Right.
I'm holding various different meetings because I know that I'm going to have to come back to the school with a lot of energy that is coming from the young men. So I need them to see me strong and fit and feeling good about myself. And just making sure that I'm connecting with you all. I think this is, for me, spiritual food. So I appreciate this opportunity and this time.
Absolutely, absolutely. Great. Principal Washington, what are you doing?
So trying to figure out a routine besides binge watching everything on Netflix with my children. I have to go back old school. A really close friend of mine had me watching Bustin' Loose. That took me all the way back. So I know, right, Richard Pryor, but I was crying, laughing.
Right.
But my girlfriends, actually, my circle of friends, my sorority sisters, shout out to Delta Sigma Theta. I know we have some in the house online. We were supposed to have a trip to Cabo. We had to cancel our trip, which was very sad. But we said, we need to figure out how we're creating wealth and building wealth in this time. And we started to have sessions with financial advisors. So I'm learning how to use stocks and figure out how to invest. And, it was just something very new for us. It wasn't anything that I had really thought about. And so just encouraging each other to try something new and to learn something different has been, a source of, excitement for me. So I'm learning stocks.
That's great. That's great. Absolutely. And laughter is good. Busting loose, right? Whatever it takes. If it's going to help you to laugh deeply, that's really, really important. And I love the Deltas. I tried to join, but they wouldn't, okay. I'm still working on it. Principal Meade.
I think two things. One, as Principal Morant mentioned, just being more present, with the family. My wife, really enjoys to decorate, and I'm not going to say I wasn't fully paying attention before, because I know she's listening right now, but I give feedback on pillows now, and I do those kind of things, and also just trying to teach myself, a new craft. We're under quarantine, and the barbers shops are closed, so I'm experimenting on my son. I'm on round 3 right now. Some have gone better than others. But he's not going to see too many people, so he's not going to get so upset. So just those kind of things, just kind of trying to teach myself new things and stay active in that way, right? Because watching the TV and being present on that it doesn't give you the greatest feeling in the world, but giving your wife feedback on some of her interests and developing some interests of my own in terms of cutting hair and watching all these YouTube clips, that's kind of gotten me through some moments where you're like, wow, this is intense, and what am I going to do next?
Absolutely. Well, this has been a great conversation as we're winding down here now. We had gotten a question that came in talking about providing that ceremony for those 8th and 12th graders. I would just say to the person who posted that, you see, we have some of the most innovative, creative leaders in the system. They are going to be committed together with their teams at their schools to figuring out how to do that. We had an idea that came up about doing an eagle-wide graduation next year. So for all the 12th graders who are going to miss out on this opportunity, I heard the mayor say today he's going to try to create a virtual graduation of some sort. We'll learn more about that in the coming days, but we will certainly be committed to creating a special opportunity and a moment for all of our young men. It's a once-in-a-lifetime moment, and I feel for them that they're not going to be able to have their regular, normal graduation. But it's about being resilient. It's about knowing that we're going through a special time. We're going to come through stronger on the other side. I think that our viewers today got a chance to see and hear from great leadership, to see the bond and the camaraderie that exists between all of you. It's something special, something that just gives me a lot of joy to know that all of our young people and our teachers and our families are in great hands. I'm gonna wrap up with 2 things. One, by telling you, this is a fun fact for people who don't know this about me. My favorite movie of all time is The 10 Commandments. I'm talking about the classic 10 Commandments with Charlton Heston, Yul Brynner, Parting of the Red Sea. I've watched it 1,000 times. I think the best gift that I ever got was when my kids bought it for me years ago, the colorized version. And I know every word, every line in the film, but there's one line in it that I think about a lot as it relates to leadership. And it's the scene where the Hebrews are crossing the Red Sea. And as they're getting near the end, before Pharaoh has his chariots start to take off to go after them, Joshua says to Moses to stand on the pavilion and let the people see you and have hope. And so I think it's not just enough to march with the people, but there are moments where you have to stand in a way where everyone can see you and draw hope and inspiration by your very presence and by your very example. And I live with that every day. I'm thankful and honored to work with each and every one of you. And I want to thank you for your leadership and all that you do. On behalf of all the Eagle families and all the parent bodies, and you all, each one of you has the best parent body in the group.
Thank you.
Right? And, so, and all of your young men, I salute you. I thank you for all that you do. I can't thank you enough. And I would just leave as a final word that we're asking that our audience tune in next week as well, as we're going to continue just this momentum of powerful conversation. We're going to be joined next week by Ron Walker, who is the head of the Coalition of Schools Educating Boys of Color. He'll be joined by my main man, Sean Dove, who leads the Campaign for Black Male Achievement. And together we will be joined by a beautiful sister named Depelsha Magruder. And she's the head of an organization called MOB, the Mothers of Black Boys. And so together, the 3 of them are going to be engaged in some very powerful conversation. We ask that you share that with all of your Eagle families. And for those who are viewing it tonight, I want to thank you for joining us. I'm sure you will agree, this has been a very, very powerful conversation. So thank you. I'm so used to saying thank you to my brothers. Plus, Lakia, we thank you all so much, and I hope everybody has a great night. Go enjoy your families.
Thank you, everybody. Have a good night.
Good night, everybody.
Good night.
Night.
Right.